And welcome to this evening's virtual planning meeting held by the virtue of new regulations introduced by the government. I am Councillor Peter Dean and I will be chairing the meeting this evening. The regulations have temporarily removed the legal requirement for local authorities to hold public meetings in person. This will enable councils to make effective and transparent decisions on the delivery of services for residents. The requirements for public meetings to be made accessible to the public remains, and the link to the virtual meeting is available on the council's website in the usual live meetings link page. In connection to a member's is lost during the meeting, I will stop the meeting to enable connection to be restored. If the connection cannot be restored within a reasonable time, the meeting will proceed, but the member who has been disconnected will not be able to vote on the matter under discussion, as they would not have heard all the facts. Should any aspect of the external link fail, I may call a short adjournment of up to 5 minutes or so to determine whether the connection can quickly be re-established, either via video technology or telephone. In the alternative, if the connection is not restored within that time, the meeting will be adjourned and any further business will not proceed until another time and date. Any public questions properly submitted to the meeting during the period will be read out by myself and answered at the meeting. Firstly, can I ask the clerk to call a roll call of members present?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Akhtar?
Present.
Councillor Davis?
Present.
Councillor Gary?
Present.
Councillor Hazel Gloucester?
Present.
Councillor Harkness?
Present.
Councillor Hewitt?
Present.
Councillor Ibrahim? Councillor Ibrahim? Councillor Iqbal?
Present.
Councillor Jakes?
Present.
Councillor Malik? Councillor Malik? Councillor Fithian?
Present.
Councillor Sheldon?
Present.
Councillor Serjan?
Present.
And Councillor Dean.
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. When the committee comes to take a vote on any item, each member will individually be asked to state whether they are for, against or abstaining. We also have officers in attendance from planning and legal and constitutional services. If we can now turn to the agenda, and for the benefit of those members of the public watching, the full agenda pack is available on the council website. The pack also includes the slides that will be presented this evening. Have we got any apologies for absence?
We have none, Chair.
We've got urgent business. I haven't been notified of any.
No, we have none, Chair.
Declarations of interest? No. Public questions? I haven't been notified of any.
No, we have none. We haven't received any, Chair.
Minutes of the previous meeting are before us. Is everybody agreed? Or is there anybody dissenting from that? No, thank you. If we then could move on to the first item of business, which is land at Knowles Lane. And before us tonight, we have one variation and one amendment to the conditions of the application. And if I could ask initially Mr. Dickman to present the application to us.
Thank you, Chair. Can members just confirm whether you can now see the start of the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Thank you. As the Chair has just alluded to, this is an application. It relates to a development scheme that comprises of a link road and an outline application for a residential development, which has previously been approved. So in fact, what we're dealing with today is some amendments that are proposed to those conditions. And members will have seen in the description, which is on the screen at the moment, that particular detail has been given of what those amendments are, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail later on. So I'll start really by running through the presentations that you had. The first part of this is the PowerPoint that was attached to the original agenda. We've also, and this is not something we would normally do, as members will know, but it's an issue that's been raised that because we're amending conditions, we thought it might also be useful to add some plans that actually show the differences between the individual plans that are sought for approval. And what you'll note is that the comparison between the two, there are only some plans that are changing, and this is really, it's only a small part of the site and a small element of the pardon me, of the approved development that's actually being changed. So just to remind members, or new for any members that are new and weren't around at the time of the previous decision, this is the site itself, and you may be able to work out just on the left-hand side, there's an area which is hatched in. In effect, that's the route of the link road and the embankments that would be required and the works required either side. So there's little bits coming off here, which would be where the roads going into the new residential development would be. So essentially, this application is only really dealing with amendments to that road area of the site. Just giving you an aerial view of that. So again, just top left corner, you can see where it comes in, and there's a wooded area within that part of the site and a brook that runs through there as well. It will then emerge at the southern end of the site onto Knowles Lane. This is just indicative, again, showing you the road, and members who were at committee last time would have seen this element. The residential, as I say, just indicative of where that part of the site would be developed. We brought this in, and again, I'll mention this a bit further. One change, if you like, since the original decision was that Natural England have allocated an area, or designated rather, an area of the site as ancient woodland, and that is the areas that you can see. And just going back to the aerials, you'll note the area at the top end of the site itself. So these areas have been designated, as I say, I'll mention more about that a little bit later. This is just showing, it's an overall plan showing the road detail itself. So it's fairly small scale, and we went into a little bit more detail. And what this is really trying to show you is that what this application is really dealing with is the kind of configuration of the road layout itself within the site. So we have a cycleway here on this side. There's a 2-metre footway. These green areas are being provided. These will be like raised platforms, although those details will still need to be confirmed later, because obviously the road will need to be adopted and our colleagues in highways will need to agree. But these areas have been shown on the present drawings, and that's merely one of the additions that has come forward with this application. These are just examples. I'll spin through this because you'll see obviously below more details. These were just to give an example. So the top one shows you how the gradient of the road as it crosses the valley obviously will drop down there, hence the reason why it will need an embankment as it cuts across the brook, and a culvert will be put in on the brook. And again, this one, again, it will be repeated later, just giving an indication that you saw on the larger scale plan of the areas that are involved in the access road. Just sent general site panorama across most of the site, which, as you say, is effectively a pasture area. These are just the road junctions, and again, this application is not involved in any alterations to these particular junction arrangements. So that's just really for information. This is, again, it won't naturally look like that finally, but this gives give an indication of really how the road would fit within the valley itself. You can see the brook going into the culvert underneath. On the left-hand side is the existing public footpath that runs alongside the brook, and obviously will then be raised up. And again, it's an issue I'll come to shortly, to cross the new road. These are just taken from part of that footpath, just so that members, if you've not been down there, you just have an indication. Effectively, it's the, you know, it's an unmade, unsurfaced footpath that runs alongside. There is another footpath which isn't the public right of way, which is on the other side of the brook as well. And these, again, we've just added these so that members can see. So the ones on the left, effectively the equivalent plans that were approved in 2019. The ones on the right are the new drawings. And you see there's some additional detail, and you see this reflected throughout. So for instance, the culvert, so on the right hand bottom area, you can see the culvert's being shown in a little bit more detail, and some additional work's been done around how that will emerge, if you like, at either side of the new road. Again, these are showing those details, and some of the earlier plans actually did already show that arrangement. As a large infrastructure project, it's always going to be the case that you know, as things develop, as the engineering drawings come forward, it will get amended. Again, really showing, I appreciate these very small scale, particularly if people are looking at a laptop, and that's why we did provide them a little bit earlier for members' attention. This one's perhaps important again if we go back to the footpath. As you can see, the culvert, the kind of bold blue line is the culvert. Then you've got the grey line, which is the brook, and then the footpath is this area to the south that goes over. And you'll notice on the left-hand side, it follows the same route, the same configuration. If you could see the annotation on there, you would know that that hasn't changed between the applications. And finally, the next two drawings, again, merely more information has been added to these drawings, but they're not, you can see the road, how that configures, how that shuts through, that's not been changed. And similarly, on this particular drawing, that's not being changed either in terms of those arrangements. So if I can just now remember how to take that off the screen. Is it still showing? Has it gone yet?
No, it's gone.
It's gone, right, thank you. So in terms of the actual details of the application, so this is seeking minor variations to the approved outline scheme for up to 265 houses, and the full applications, that's a detailed application for the link road. In the report, you'll see the representations and the consultation responses that have been received. You'll note that in the representations, we do make clear that there have been a lot of objections, but many of those objections are to the principle of the development of the site. And that, as I'll explain shortly, is not the purpose of this application as set out in legislation under which the application's been submitted. On the late list, Saddleworth Parish Council wanted it to be made clear, although we've indicated what their comments are in the main report, they wanted to make clear that that was an objection to the application. So in terms of this type of application, this is what's termed as Section 73 application. And again, I'm taking bits from the report really. The Act states that in considering an application under this provision, the local planning authority shall consider only the question of the conditions subject to which planning permission should be granted. And it goes on to explain that under Section 73, if permission is granted, it creates a new independent permission for the same development. So the point there is that no matter what happens with this application, the previous approval still stands as it is. And the applicant could implement that new permission or would be able to implement this particular permission. And it also says decision notice under this part of the Act should set out all the conditions that are imposed on the new permission and restate the conditions that were imposed on an earlier permission that continues to have effect. So it's almost stressing that that's what we do. It is about the conditions that were involved and whether they there's a justification for those being changed. So effectively, that's the scope of the application. We have to make clear this is not an opportunity to reassess the merits of the original decision beyond the scope that's set out in that part of the Act. So what are the changes? There's two changes. The first one relates to condition 8 as it was originally applied to the application. And what that did was define the detailed matters that comprised a landscape management plan, including a set of ecological features that needed to be approved. The applicant has considered in making this application that because that was, so the decision notice originally was split up into 3 bits: full, conditions relating to the full, the link road, the full and the outline, the link road and the res, and the outline. And they feel that because it was in the full and outline, it would somehow have prevented the link road taking place before the residential development. Well, given that the residential development is served off the link road, clearly that's not the case, but nevertheless, it's obviously important that we get clarification. So the intention, what they're suggesting is that the conditions go into a separate one for the full and the outline. What it is the intention of that condition, of course, is that the requirements for a landscape management plan, so those little details that you see in that condition, they need to be applied to every bit of the development. So this is a big site. The residential itself is likely to come forward in phases, and as part of each one of those phases, they would need to provide a landscape management plan for the areas involved. So moving the original condition to the outline part of the report, which is condition 14 now, that ensures all those requirements remain unamended and in full before any residential development takes place. In regard to the road, the full bit of the application, there was already a condition that restricted work commencing on the road until various matters, ecological related matters, were approved. So it's made sense, rather than impose another separate condition, to put those together. So in fact, all the original requirements of condition 8, they still apply to every single bit of this development. So ultimately that change, it doesn't remove, it doesn't weaken any of those existing obligations insofar as the landscape management plan is concerned. And as such, officers' view to committee is that there's no material planning grounds to oppose this particular change. The second element of it related to a condition 13, which provided some details of plans for the link road specifically. And since then, as I said, development, they will evolve as further details of an engineering scheme come forward. In this case, the latest plans, they show the indicative location of the speed tables, as I mentioned earlier, separate cycleway and footway along that area. They also show that over the time, additional work in relation to how the culvert will be handled will come forward, and that's shown on the plans. But I would stress to members that the conditions of the original approval, particularly 2 and 3, which relate to the culvert details, the precise details of that, they still apply. So this permission doesn't change that. So that agreement and the agreement with any statutory undertakers that need to be involved, that needs to be done. There's no changes, material changes to the alignment, width or gradient of the road, which you saw from the earlier plan. So consequently, these revisions don't cause a material change in impact. In effect, they are of fairly minor significance. The highways officer has assessed those amended details and considers them to be acceptable, but has noted, of course, as I say, the road ultimately will be subject to adoption, therefore it has to be constructed to the satisfaction of the local highway authority. And some of these details, such as where the actual construction of the platforms for the crossings, they may well be amended in order to meet those adoption processes. These detailed designs and the technical drawings, as I say, they're going to evolve as the scheme developments, and that's not unusual in any kind of engineering project. Just a final comment on that. I know there's a query being raised in relation to vehicle tracking onto Knowles Lane and the junction. Again, there's only certain parts of this development as approved are being amended or amendments being sought. The junctions onto Knowles Lane is not being amended. So those details are not being changed. The plans which indicated those, which I know were being disputed at the time, they've been considered. That issue is not for consideration now under this application. So what we have to look at is, has there been any material change in circumstances since the original permission was granted? There have been no material changes in national or local planning policies, and there have been no significant material changes on the site itself. One change, which I mentioned earlier on, is the designation of part of the site as ancient woodland, and I'll come to that again shortly. But I just firstly want to go through the issue of environmental impact assessment. And this is a process that normally applies to schemes that are deemed to have significant environmental impacts. But again, for those members who were involved last time, you'll be aware that an environmental impact assessment wasn't required with the last application. And again, I just want to do a little bit of a quote really from National Planning Policy Guidance. Section 73 application is a new application for planning permission under those regulations. Where the development is a type listed under Schedule 2 and satisfies the criteria and thresholds within that, a local planning authority must carry out a screening exercise and issue that as to whether environmental impact assessment is necessary. It is a Schedule 2 assessment, and as a result, we have carried out that assessment of the criteria. That was similarly undertaken on the previous approval. So that had a screening opinion, both by the council and separately by the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State confirmed that whilst there'll be some environmental impacts from the scheme, they would not be so significant that environmental impact assessment would be required. As I've explained, the changes here are minor. So therefore, that's an important material consideration. In respect to the present application, the applicant has sought a screening opinion, and that assesses the proposals. But that's, if you like, their view. And then it's for the council to make a judgment on that. And that judgment, based on the changes, is that there's not been any significant change in circumstance that would justify a request now for environmental impact assessment. The ancient woodland, since this application was submitted, certainly since the previous approval, Natural England has designated part of the site, and you saw that on the picture earlier on, as ancient woodland. That is a material change since the previous approval, and therefore its significance has to be assessed. You'll see in the report that we have sought council's opinions. We've sought barrister's opinion on that, simply because it is deemed to be an important issue and we need to make sure it's been properly considered. The applicant has also addressed the issue because they've carried out an updated survey of the impact on trees within the site, and that survey has been available since the middle of last year to see. And that's the important thing in terms of the assessment of the EIA, because that information is there. People have been able to look at that and make a judgment as to whether their assessment is acceptable or not. Ancient woodlands, not a statutory designation. It's not been subject to any formal consultation with the landowner, with the council, or by means of any general publicity. So unlike this application, it's not been through a public process. Nevertheless, the NPPF makes clear that development that results in the loss of ancient woodland should be refused unless there are wholly exceptional reasons, and it sets out what those examples of wholly exceptional reasons are. One of those is where it's infrastructure projects, where the public benefit clearly outweighs the loss or deterioration of habitats. Now that's an issue that has already been addressed under the previous application. The impact on trees within the sites, there's the same trees that are there, designation or nay, they have already been assessed and they've been reassessed as part of this application. Again, a query has been raised that suggests that the way that that's been quoted in the officer's report is misleading. I can report to members that's not the case. there is a sentence in the middle. So you'll notice the way that if you look at the report, the dots, standard format of way of doing this, means that a bit in the middle has been left out. That bit in the middle is in brackets, and that sets out some examples of what an infrastructure project is, one of which is a nationally significant infrastructure project. So that doesn't mean that that exclusion only applies to nationally significant infrastructure projects, which of course this isn't, but it is an infrastructure project. So we're satisfied, and your legal officer is satisfied, that the way that is reflected is an accurate reflection of how the environmental impact assessment regulations in relation to the ancient woodland has been dealt with on this application. I just want to add again, that designation doesn't apply retrospectively to the existing permission, so that still stands and that could still be implemented. The officer's report sets out the relevance of the ancient woodland designation, and this is having regard to Council's advice that we've received. Notwithstanding that, there's no material change in terms of loss of numbers of trees or areas of woodland, and the mitigation for that loss that's already been recognised is still in place and will still form part of the approval that goes on since then. So the question is, in terms of this particular application, in terms of the nature, the size, location of the ancient woodland as it relates to the overall scheme, is that a significant change? And you'll note that the ancient woodland itself is a small part of the overall development site, and in fact is a relatively small part of the road area as well. So taking these factors in consideration, again, with support from Council and as legal advice, it's concluded that the Council's assessment, that environmental impact assessment not required, in line with previous conclusions, still stands. But this obviously it has an impact on it crosses a woodland, crosses a brook, it has an impact on ecology and natural habitat. As part of the way this development proposal has evolved, there's a full ecological assessment in 2017. That was updated in April 2019. So these were the documents on which the approval's been granted. And as I referred to earlier, the applicant has done an assessment, an updated 2020 assessment report on those areas. These provide the baseline of what the ecological situation will be and how development would relate, for instance, to protected species and obviously the ancient woodland that's gone through. The conclusions that have been reached are that those impacts are not materially different. Inevitably, again, it's sort of stressing the point, it's a big development site. It will be done over an extended period, and ecological circumstances obviously evolve during that type of period. And that's the reason why, again, if you look at the conditions on the approval, the existing one and the one we're recommending, surveys are required. So updates of impact on protected species, for instance, they would be required because it's recognised that, you know, development of the site might take 3 or 4 years, who knows, you know, things can materially change and those issues have to be addressed. Again, nothing has changed on that, nor is the requirement for the applicant to carry out any other statutory requirements, whether it's the requirements for not harming protected species, requirements under the Habitats Directive, etc. They don't need to carry that out. The application, as you see in the report, ecological specialist, the Great Manchester Ecology Unit, Natural England, notwithstanding the ancient woodland designation, and the Environment Agency have all been consulted and have not raised objections to this application. I think that's important to know. The public footpath, again, you saw in the drawings, the impact on the public footpath that the road crosses hasn't changed. So the arrangements for how that would cross the road, which involves putting steps in at either side, haven't changed. But nevertheless, you'll notice that the council's, it's been raised about the council's obligations under the Equality Act. Has that, for instance, been affected? So have we taken account of that on users of that footpath? Well, as you saw on the pictures, the present footpath, follows the southern bank of the Forney Brook, and it meanders. It's got an undulating surface. I have to say, the last time I went down there and walked on that area, it had been, unlike at the moment, during a period of heavier rain, it was waterlogged in places, and there were short stepped areas. So it's not accessible to the whole community at the present time. And I think that's an important consideration to be made in terms of this application. The applicant has looked at alternatives. Could a tunnel go under there? But that raises other issues. You know, some people don't feel comfortable going through a tunnel for security reasons on that. And the scheme that's been put forward was deemed to be the most appropriate for it. The other thing to stress is, as part of the application, and we mentioned about the cycleway and the footways, the speed tables, the design of these schemes and of the subsequent residential development will all take account of the need for people to access the site, all members of the community. And from that point of view, we're satisfied that we have followed our statutory requirements in that sense. Again, final thing to mention, and you know, everything's not just about a planning application. The diversion of footpath requires a separate approval under section 257 of the Act. So that's a process that has to be gone through, notwithstanding this grant of planning permission in any case. Because we're only dealing with part of the site, the report, you'll note, doesn't go into great detail on other factors, so impact on heritage, flood risk, land stability, obviously the design and layout of the wider residential development, because they're not for consideration as part of this application. They will be required, details of those on the conditions, and obviously at reserve matters stage when the housing scheme comes forward. So I know going on quite a lot, I'm getting close to the end. Recommendation, you see in the report, the application is approved subject to those conditions that we've now suggested and to the requirements of a section 106 agreement. And how this works is that that's the same agreement that tied in with the previous application itself. And just briefly, that was for affordable housing, off-site highway works, management of open space, and a transference of some land to St Agnes School. So ultimately, this application is about minor revisions to the previously approved scheme. We're well aware that there is a large amount of opposition to the overall development. We're well aware of that from the previous decision, and you know that they are legitimate concerns and objections, but they were addressed as part of the previous decision. The officer's advice to committee on this application is the scope of it does not allow those to be reconsidered. And it just a final point is that whether members actually agree with that overall development or not, that's not what this application is about. It's not the opportunity for that overall scheme to be redetermined. And you are really looking at the changes that have come about as a result of the conditions that the applicant has applied for. That's not just your office's view, as I said right at the beginning, that's established in the legislation as to what this type of application is. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dickman. Has any members at this stage got any questions on the report from Mr. Dickman before we move on to other speakers? Councillor Sheldon.
Chair, if I may ask Mr. Dickman, because I don't know, can you tell me when this application first came to Oldham as an idea of a development? Thank you.
As an idea of a development, well, the link road has certainly appeared in the local plan for some years.
Sorry, Graham. The idea of building on this land. When did it first come to the council?
I haven't got the precise dates, but part of the site, if you go back to the local plan and the allocation of the local plan, and this is dealing with issues that, which, as I say, were part of the scheme, the larger scheme. So that's not what we're dealing with in terms of designation. It's already got approval. Part of the site is open land. So part of the site is protected open land for it. Part of the site has a housing designation on it. But those in effect have been superseded now by the fact that there is an extant planning permission for both the road and for the residential development. So I say, unfortunately, Councillor Sheldon, I don't have the precise dates of that and what date the plan went through and so on. But the current situation, it just says clear, there is a permission for this development on the site.
Is there any further questions? No? Okay then. If I can then move to speakers that we've got. Firstly, Miss Barker, who's speaking against the application. Miss Barker, you'll be allowed 3 minutes, and just before the time is up, you'll be given a warning. And if you wish, you can start in your own time.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Ancient woodland is one of our rarest habitats and only covers 2.5% of England. It's irreplaceable. You only have to look at the news over the past few days. Many woodland plants and animals are in decline. Both the government and the Woodland Trust state that developers and planners should look for ancient woodland before plans are submitted. This didn't happen, and it was only discovered after the application was decided. Was it a case of not looking for something that you didn't want to find? Ancient woodland completely changes the context of the original application. The application report for this amendment states that only a small amount of ancient woodland will be destroyed. This makes no difference. It's all protected under national planning policy. It can only be destroyed in wholly exceptional circumstances and where a suitable compensation strategy is in place. This also applies to minor material amendments too. But Note 58 clarifies that wholly exceptional circumstances relate to specific situations such as national infrastructure projects like HS2, not a road that's been aspirational for 4 decades and is only being built to access a housing development. The Woodland Trust Planners Manual also confirms this, as does the objection letter from CPRE, the Countryside Charity. There's no compensation strategy in place, only mitigation. This application doesn't meet the criteria, it must be refused. Registration of ancient woodland was accepted by Emma Goldberg from Natural England, one of the top tree experts in the country. When the developer found out about the ancient woodland, did they stop to think about how they could change the design to protect it? No, instead they tried to get that status removed. Emma Goldberg rejected that challenge along with the National Vegetation Classification Report attached to this application. It was done at the wrong time of year, wrong survey and wrong maps used. Naturally, are the only body who can decide on what is and what isn't ancient woodland. The developer and the planning authority has no say. Ancient woodland status is still in place. That same rejected NVC report was used to inform the EIE screening request. And even though the Secretary of State has been asked to provide a screening directive, the planning department have ignored this and are pressing on before he's made a decision. That can't be right. Oldham Council wants to be the greenest borough in Greater Manchester. How green is it going to look in destroying some of the country's most precious habitat? Climate crisis is the responsibility of us all. Ancient and long-established woodland hold 36% of all woodland carbon. They are too valuable to destroy. Our little woodlands might be in the best condition, but that is no reason to destroy them. In fact, the government states that conditions should not be taken into account in planning decisions as they can always be improved. In the officer's report, consultation with Natural England does not state no objection, and this document was not published. This application does not meet the test for wholly exceptional circumstances. There's no compensation strategy in place, and had the published guidance been followed originally, checking for ancient woodland before submitting plans, we wouldn't be in the position we're in now, faced with the issue of destroying ancient woodland by default. This application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barker. Has any member got any questions of Ms. Barker? Councillor Harkness?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to ask, when was the obviously all this the work done on the ancient woodland, and you've just quoted quite a number of people who've commented on that. When was that actually done? And is there any sort of reference? Because I know Graham was talking about the environmental impact assessment and how one wasn't needed. Have any of those made any comments associated with that, or do you have any comments regarding that as well?
I haven't got any comments on it. I've been trying to get hold of what Natural England have actually said, the consultation with Natural England in the office report actually says, it doesn't actually say objection or no objection, it says something else, but that consultation hasn't been published, so I don't know what it says. I've asked Natural England for a copy. I think for transparency, that should have been published. As for the EIA screening, I think because ancient woodland is so important, I would have thought that would have had some bearing on it. And I understand that the planning department have some kind of leeway in how they interpret whether one's needed or not. But I think when it's something as important as a natural asset like ancient woodland, then perhaps one should have been considered.
Okay. Have we got any more questions for Ms. Barker? Okay. Thanks very much indeed, Ms. Barker.
Thank you.
If we could then move on to the contribution for the developer, is it Mr. Ralph?
It's Mr. Ralph, Chair.
Yeah. If you could speak for 3 minutes and just before the time you'll be given notice.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, good evening, councillors. My name is Thomas Ralph, Planning and Land Manager for Russell Homes. We fully support the recommendation of your officers to approve the minor material amendments and the rewording of Condition 8 in relation to the approved planning permission on the site. I have nothing more to add to the presentation of your officer, but will happily answer any questions you may have.
Has any member got any questions of the developer or the representative?
Yep.
Councillor Sergeant?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hi, Mr. Rolfe. I just want to clarify the number of linked roads that you're planning on having on that site. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor, we are just proposing the one link road as per the approved plans. There's only a spur junction to come off for the residential development, which will be to one slightly to the west and one to the east nearer to Knowles Lane, but there's no other roads to come off. It'd just be the link road as approved and as detailed in the general arrangement plan shown.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Gloucester?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Mr. Ralph. Just on the link road and where it meets the junction, is there any sort of work planned at that junction? For example, I'm not sure, can a bus get round there? As Highways looked at that in the detail that is needed? Because to me it looks quite a narrow road on the photographs in front of me, and it's not even clear where that link road will come out onto this T junction. I can't decide whether it's going to become a crossroads or I'm really clueless at the moment. I just can't identify off the plans what I'm looking at, to be fair.
Yes, Councillor. So the application before you doesn't deal with any amendments to the junctions that have already been approved. There are upgrades as part of the Section 106 agreement, which involves some Section 278 works to upgrade the junction at Ashford Road and Knowles Lane. There will be a junction at the top of a Rhine Turn pocket, and then there's also further, improvement works down towards Knowles Lane. Those details are included in the 106 and will be delivered as part of the 278 works.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hewitt?
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the ancient woodlands. Right, so first of all, I'd like to ask, why was it not picked up on when the first planning application was actually...
Sorry to interrupt, Chair, but Councillor Hewitt did post that he had lost connection, or at least his computer was updating. Can I just clarify that Councillor Hewitt has heard everything that everybody has said on this?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
You have? Yeah. That's fine, thank you.
Okay, so going back to the ancient woodland, could you tell me please why it wasn't picked up on when the first application was presented to the planning committee, and why an investigation wasn't carried out to see whether it was there or not? And why was the ancient woodland actually challenged and kind of rebuked?
To your first point, Councillor, It wasn't designated as ancient woodland when we did the surveys in 2017 and 2019, as per the surveys we undertook. It wasn't identified by the ecology surveys or the tree surveys, and neither GMEU, Natural England, nor the Environment Agency raised this as a matter. So that's why it was not considered as a designation then. As per the officer's recommendation, you know, the link road has already been approved, and the reason we submitted the verification report was because we spoke with our ecologists and tree arboriculturalists, and they didn't consider that it was ancient woodland or that designation. That's why we submitted that report.
Okay, thank you.
Have we got any more questions? Have you got another question, Councillor Gloucester, or have you just left your hand up?
Sorry, I have actually. So in terms of this ancient woodland designation, what implication does that actually have on this application? Is that woodland going to be saved, or is it going to be chopped down? That's, I think, what I want clarification on at the moment, because it's really not clear from either the report or the attached documents.
The approved plans for the link road do not change any of the woodland that was to be removed and already approved. The plans before you don't change what has already been approved in terms of the link road design, and the state of the planning permission is still there and granted.
Thank you. Could I bring Mr. Dickman in just to clarify one or two issues that was?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, the first one I just want to comment on was about the MPPF and the reference to ancient woodland, because I did clarify, I did clarify this particular issue when I went through the presentation, because I was aware that it had been raised. It was implied by Ms. Barker that there's an exception to the loss of ancient woodland, and that this doesn't apply to this scheme because it's not a nationally important infrastructure project. What the exception actually says is, for example, infrastructure projects, and then in parentheses, including nationally significant infrastructure projects, orders under the Transport and Works Act and hybrid acts, close brackets, where the public benefit would clearly outweigh the loss or deterioration of habitat. So it doesn't mean it has to be a nationally significant infrastructure project. It means it has to be an infrastructure project for which then that assessment is carried out. And that's what happened last time. In terms of Natural England, I appreciate Ms. Barker's not actually seen their consultation response, but what they have appreciated in the consultation response is precisely the case we were making, that this application is about the amendments to the scheme, and therefore their response to that and says, we understand this is what the proposal is, we have no observations to make on that. In terms of the designation, I think Mr. Ralph mentioned it as well. It's one of those very strange ones that, in fact, it was the objectors to the scheme who actually brought that designation to our attention and to the applicant's attention, because an assessment appears to have been done by Natural England, which is not referenced in their consultation response, by an officer at Natural England. It's not actually clear whether that is a desktop exercise that was undertaken or not. It was designated on the 18th of February 2020. So in answer to Councillor Hewitt's original comment there, it wasn't designated at the time the last application was under consideration. We have taken account of it. We've specified that clearly in the report. We're not ignoring it. We're not saying it's not ancient woodland. We're not trying to decry that. But what we need to be clear on is the relationship between that and the scheme as a whole, and the scheme that's been approved on the site. Loss of trees is always a negative, and sometimes it has to happen because development will need to take place. The amount of woodland that's lost on this, and it was looked at last time, it might not have been ancient woodland, but the assessment was there. Some trees, some areas of trees would be affected by the site. We sought legal opinion on this, not because we weren't necessarily clear on the answer, but because we felt it was important to be absolutely clear and to have that independent opinion on it. And that independent opinion, we've referenced it in the report, is that it doesn't change the status of the site as not being one that requires environmental impact assessment, nor does that designation change the fact that there is a loss of trees which is already recognised and already will be mitigated for as part of the application. So really, that's really all I want, is just to be clear on that we have addressed those issues in dealing with the application. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask Mr. Rolfe, for the trees that are going to be lost for this, if it gets approved, I mean, would it be possible for yourselves to replant the number of trees that are lost elsewhere within Oldham?
Sorry, Councillor, if I can just respond. There is significant, we're putting in mitigation planting onto the link road as part of the development on the site, and there'll also be replacement and, you know, landscaping to be delivered as part of the residential element of the scheme. So mitigation is being provided in terms of as a result of the loss of the woodland, which was accepted and agreed previously as part of the approved permission.
Right, and just again to clarify, how many footpaths will be off from this link road into the woodlands?
It's just the one public right-of-way diversion which will go over the link road again as per the approved plans.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered, in terms of if the mitigation and replacement of the trees, is that going to be a like-for-like number? So the exact number lost will be the exact number replaced?
I think there's... Yeah, sorry, Councillor.
Go on, you're all right.
No, I think the replacement planting, which was considered previously, I think there'll be a 4-to-1 replacement to be put in place for for the trees lost crudely. So we, you know, there's a more 4-for-1 replacement planting meter provided.
So do you mean 1 tree replaced for every 4 lost, or the other way around?
No, it's the other way around, Councillor. So for every tree that is, you know,
yeah, I thought you'd have picked up on that,
that.
It's the authorities.
Okay, thank you.
It's the authorities' policy that we plant 4 for everyone we lose.
I just don't look through every policy before every application. Thank you.
Okay then. We've got no more questions of the officers. If I can possibly then ask anybody if they've got any contributions to the debate, or does anybody want to move a recommendation?
Okay. Excuse me, Chair. Excuse me, Chair.
Sorry. Yes, I'm sorry. I apologise.
Yeah,
Councillor Leach wanted to contribute as
well.
Thank you. Who's the ward councillor?
Yes, indeed. And so I am speaking as the ward councillor for Saddleworth Western Lees, in which this application is cited. I'm going to limit myself only on issues of process. Others' comments concern the substance of the applications. You'll be aware of the deep concern in the community about this development. All the more reason, therefore, that proper process must be followed to provide full and timely access to documentation related to this application. We pride ourselves on being a cooperative council. Our slogan includes our bit and your bit, and it's incumbent on us to make sure that both bits work. Sadly, in the case of this application, our bit has not been performed as well as it should, and this has been admitted by a senior planning officer in correspondence, especially about the timeliness and the dating of documentation on the council's planning website. Important documents were not publicly available on the website until after the period of public consultation had ended. The planning department did not extend the consultation period to allow for the necessary public comment. A major concern you have heard already is that of the environmental assessment and the screening request for an environmental impact assessment. The officer's report for this application states clearly that a new environmental impact assessment screening opinion was sought. Yet the stated date of the publication of the relevant documentation on the website is the 5th of April 2021, after the period of public consultation had been closed. The printed date on the documents themselves, when you're able to open them, is the 20th of October 2020. Given great environmental sensitivity of this site, made greater now by the finding of ancient woodland in the area, it's astonishing that the planning department did not take steps to ensure that members of the community had access to these documents and time to discuss them in full consultation before this committee considered the application. I personally wrote to the interim head of planning on the 7th of April to ask for a new period of public consultation be considered. I got no response. The ecological assessment completed in April 2019 on the planning website has a publication date of the 5th of April 2021. You'll note that this 2019 assessment was not publicly available at the time the committee considered the original planning application at its meeting on the 1st of July 2019. I ask you as members of this committee and councillors for wards where sensitive planning applications are made, would you be willing to approve such an application in your area under such circumstances of such problematic public access to timely, critical information? At the very least, I would ask you to consider deferring this application until another period of public consultation has been concluded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Leach. Could I ask the officers to respond to the comments that you've made?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Leach's observations are recognised, and she's referred to the fact that the issue has already been raised. I accept those documents, particularly the screening request, should have been placed on the website at a much earlier stage. I think, as members know, we do set a timetable for representations to be made, and that's in order we comply with legislation. What it basically means is that at the end of the usual 21-day period, we can determine an application. But of course, members will know from late lists of yore that all representations will still be considered right up to the date of a determination itself. So it's not the case that people are blocked out after that date, and that if after you don't get in before the 21 days, you still get that opportunity. But it is recognised that that document should have been there before. It was mentioned about the ecological assessment 2019. Pre-COVID, of course, we had paper files. We had access to the office. There is no statutory requirement for all documents, so for instance consultation replies, to be on the website. So at the time that particular decision was made, that document was readily available. When it went on the website or not, it was readily available, and the issue wasn't picked as a particular concern either at that stage. It has to be noted in terms of the fact that that application has been subject to a judicial review, and it wasn't deemed to be an issue that undermined that particular approval that's been granted. In terms of, say, the document that should have been available, that's a document that, yes, it will set out the applicant's opinion in respect of whether environmental impact assessment is required or not. It's then for the council to determine whether that's the case. I fully appreciate what Councillor Leach was said, and if members wish to provide another period, that's fair enough. That is obviously how the democratic process works. We're quite happy that that would occur, but I would ask members to consider what the status of that information is. And ultimately, when these things come before the court doesn't just look at process, it looks at what the outcome would be. And I've stressed throughout the nature of this application, how it differs from the approved scheme. And those are the issues that change. So environmental impact assessment wasn't deemed necessary last time. In this assessment, it's not deemed necessary. The only change of any particular importance is the ancient woodland. And again, I'll say to members, we have sought Council's opinion on whether that changes the impression of this application that environmental impact assessment is needed. On the ground, all the impacts are the same. So regardless of designation, they're all the same. So if members wish to go, and we've been through 2 periods of public consultation on this application, to delay a decision, and government is quite clear on this, that planning officers, planning departments should not unnecessarily delay the determination of an application, but for the sake of ensuring that that democratic process is through, that's the decision members are quite at their liberty to take. But I would stress that all the information, the assessment of the woodland, and yes, that's being questioned, and we've taken account of the fact that the applicant's statement on that is questioned, but that the conclusion reached, that's how we reach all these conclusions by weighing everything up, is that it doesn't materially change the outcome of the application from the previous decision. So I'll basically leave it at that. It is accepted that better could have been done in terms of how those documents are moving, are put on the website. And of course, I think the one thing that this period of virtual activity has taught us is how much more important that is to people to get that on there. And we most certainly will take that on board in the general sense to obviously, hopefully avoid these sort of issues occurring in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Do you want to make any further comments, Councillor Leach?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I'm grateful for Mr. Dickman's acknowledgement that some errors were made. Getting access to paper documentation when you don't know that it exists is a little bit difficult. But I would urge you to consider another period of public consultation with the documentation that is now available. Thank you.
There was 156 responses, of course, to the consultation.
Yes, and we know that some of them related to this minor amendment, quote unquote, and some of them didn't.
Right, Councillor Agnes, did you want to make a comment?
I suppose, yeah, I'm still a bit concerned with some of the comments made relating to the ancient woodland, and the Natural England did a consultation report. There's some questions over, you know, how that was done and the details of that, which we don't seem to have here. So I'm a bit concerned that, you know, we're going to be making a decision on a material change when we don't necessarily have the full facts and information from Natural England relating to the ancient woodland and obviously the impact. And it is different. Yeah, we've looked at there is environmental impact, and that was assessed in the last application, which you know, obviously I didn't support at the time, but this is a different application. But it is ancient woodland now, so there is a different significance. And I think if we don't have all that detail of exactly what they've said and their facts, then I think it's quite hard to be able to make that decision and approve this.
Right, thank you. It's open for a discussion now, or anybody would like to move where we actually go from here?
Could I move this for approval, Chair?
All right, Councillor Pithian.
Chair, can I move this for deferment?
I will second the deferment.
Could you just hold on? Councillor Pithian's moved approval. Is that seconded at all?
Yeah, can I second that, please, Chair?
Right, Councillor Davis seconded. Okay. if we could, or if any member wants to contribute around that, or debate around the approval or not approval.
Chair, I'd like to go for deferment. Plenty of reasons which have been discussed by the two speakers against this application. Timely access to documents. There's a 6 months gap between when important documents were printed and dated to when they went onto the website. Now, they didn't go on until April, which was well inside the 21 days of the consultation, which give objectors no opportunity to discuss. There's no screening requests at ecological assessments. Again, 6 months delay from when they were dated. Sorry, longer, 18 months from when it was dated before it went on the 5th of April 2021. Again, inside the 21 days. So just them reasons alone, which the faith in that the public has in the planning process, we need to just take a little breath and let these documents be assessed, because some of the environment's impact assessments are redacted. So no, we'd have to work. They need working around as well.
Councillor Gloucester.
Yeah, Chair. I think I was basically going to say the same. There's just the transparency on this application is absolutely ridiculous. And do you know what? It seems to be every large application where the public have got deep concerns and councillors have deep concerns. Things don't get put on the website. Things are redacted. Things go missing. And I just think we need to start being what we say we are and a little bit more transparent. You know, it's tiring to constantly have to make assessments that have a massive impact on our communities without the information that should be provided. Thank you, Chair.
We've got quite a number of people that want to contribute now. If we could go on to Councillor Harkness, and then I'll bring Mr. O'Brien.
Yeah, I'm going to echo the last two comments. I'd like to second Steve's proposal. And in addition to obviously those documents, I'd like to see the Ancient Woodlands documents also included in the consultation process as well.
Okay. Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding is that the redaction only relates to the location of specific protected species, and the reason for the redaction is clearly not to make the whereabouts of said protected species available to the general public for their own protection.
Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask Mr. Aubrey a question, please?
Yes, certainly.
Do we know what those protected species are at all? Does it actually detail what they are as opposed to where they are in that report, Simon?
I don't know if Graham wants to add something. My understanding is that it's badgers.
Right. Okay.
I don't know if there are any other ones. Graham may have more information on that than myself.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I can just add that. I mean, it actually does make it clear that the areas of the report that are redacted, the titles are in there. So, for instance, it says, in terms of badgers, these are the methods that we've carried out, but obviously then it excludes the plans and so on, showing where they are. So it is clear why what we redact. Might not be why we're redacting it, although it does say confidential, I think, on there. So that is the case. So it's not, again, it's not hiding things, apart from obviously to make sure those protected species, as Mr. Oldham said, are not harmed unduly as a result. Thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else want to contribute? If I could just go to Mr. Evans, who's our legal advisor, for direction to make sure we get it absolutely right. Mr. Evans, we've had, firstly, we had a proposal which was seconded for approval. Would that be taken to vote first?
Yes, Chair, because that was the first motion that was proposed and seconded. So you deal with that one first. So anybody who is wanting to defer the application should obviously vote against the approval. If the approval falls, then you can vote on the deferral motion.
Okay. Okay. So unless anybody else wants to contribute, we'll go to the proposal for approval by Councillor Pythian. If we could have a roll call, please.
Certainly can, Chair. Bear with me a moment. Councillor Akhtar.
4.
Councillor Davis.
4.
Councillor Gary.
4.
Councillor Hazel Gloucester.
Against.
Councillor Hartness.
Against.
Councillor Hewitt.
Against.
Councillor Iqbal.
Approve.
Councillor Jakes.
4.
Councillor Fithian.
4.
Councillor Sheldon.
Against.
Councillor Serjan.
Abstain.
And Councillor Dean.
4.
That motion therefore is carried 7 in favour, 4 against and 1 abstention, Chair.
Thank you. So the variation and amendment are approved. Thank you very much for all those who have contributed. And I've no doubt that we'll be back when further applications come regarding this site. And I think that any lessons that have to be learnt have been picked up tonight, and we'll make sure that there's absolute clarity everywhere that we can actually make. But we are going through some difficult times everywhere, I think. Okay, thanks very much indeed. If we then can move on to the second item that's on the agenda tonight, which is land to the west of Broadway and Milton Drive, Chadderton. And if I can, is it Mr. Dickman that's going to outline this again?
It's me again, yes, I'm afraid. So I'll just try and get the presentation up again. If somebody can just let me know when you can see the opening page.
Yes, we can see that, Mr. Dickman.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, this application relates to an area. It's the Foxdenton strategic site, north of Foxdenton Lane, west of Broadway, which again, some members, particularly those who've been on committee for some time, may well have been aware of. It's a very major development in the Chadderton area that's gradually been moving forward. A couple of housing scheme within part of the site have already been approved and are underway, and there are applications currently for commercial development on other parts of the site as well, and an application for a linear park within the site. So this is the wider area, and in fact that basically shows you the area you can see in brown cutting across is Lydia Becker Way. So this is the new road which links across from Broadway to the top end of Foxdenton Lane through the site. Middle kind of left hand side, you can see the area, one of the first area of residential development that's under construction. There's also an area which is under construction at the northern end of the site at the moment as well. This particular application relates to, you can see the school, which is the arched type building in there with its playing fields just to the west. So the site, in effect, goes round that. So effectively it's the land west of that, going round to the north to the little triangle of residential development, which is on Milton Drive. The site has been previously allocated as part of that outline approval for residential developments. Again, that's just showing you, if you can work through the two drawings. So there's the school, and it's this area that goes round the site. This is just giving you a phasing of the site. So that the R obviously stands for residential on there, and we're dealing with R5 and R6, which are at the bottom corner of the site. R4, which extends further down to Foxdenton Lane, that's not part of this development. The area that goes round it, the green area, is the linear park, which will basically serve the whole of this development, and that's again mentioned in the report because that's part of the assessment of open space. This is the scheme, so it's a full detailed application for residential development. When the outline approvals were originally put in place, the whole of this scheme, apart from 40 dwellings, were to be served from a new access down on Foxdenton Lane. 40 dwellings would have come off Milton Drive, which is at the northern end of the north, kind of northeastern, so the top right-hand corner of the site. The intention post-development is that the whole of this development will be served via the existing access which is next to the school, which is a private access at the moment, but which is intended to be an adopted access. That emerges onto, I'll show you some photographs, onto Broadway at Signal Control Junction. And that's the school, obviously, as you can see, the site in the background. This is where the access to the site will go in. So as you're going through there, as you can see, it bends round to the right and then comes round, and where the fencing is, the distance, the final access to the site will go in there. And this view on the left is basically looking across, again, towards the school, to the access position, which you can see is it's an elevated, if you can work that out, it's at an elevated level relative to the site. And one of the problems with that is getting that construction traffic in there. And as part of this proposal, it's intended that the initial construction traffic will be taken from an access off Foxdenton Lane. And again, we'll show you some details of that. So the temporary construction access, so this is Foxdenton Lane, this area to the right, which heads down towards the playing fields. Now you can see it's quite a narrow one. The fencing is the school playing field, and the area on the left is at the back of the houses on Foxdenton Lane. So clearly, as a construction access, it'll need quite an area of work to clear that, make it accessible, and there will need to be a banksman available at all times to make sure that the traffic is properly processed through the site. There's a construction management plan as part of the application, and the application is conditioned that the measures within that, which include these kind of elements to it, are adhered to before development can commence. So you go, in fact, it shows this because it's looking further down. Once you get beyond the section at the back of the houses, the initial section, there is a proposal to widen an area. So you get a kind of passing place created at that point, and then this view on the right goes further up from the site, which is in the distance, through towards the application site for that. These are giving you some images. This is the southern part of the site. As I say, the principle of residential development on this area has already been approved. This is a view towards the linear park. So this is looking from the north down. You can see, just see on the middle left, you can see a building, that's the school. The application site is on an elevated area, and then the valley, so this lower area is where the linear park will be constructed. Again, it's giving you a view from a bit further up from Lydia Becker Way. So again, you can see that elevated area in the middle and the linear park, which will extend this way, and you can see some of the tree planting that's now going in place will go around that, and obviously will provide the major elements of amenity space for those people. It does adjoin some properties at the northern end of the site on Chiltern Avenue, first property on Broadway and then on round to Milton Drive. So you can see these boundaries that are in place. Obviously there will be a new boundary fence put in there. This particular point is where a public footpath crosses the site, and similar to the comment I made on Knowles Lane, notwithstanding this application, the diversion of that will still need to be subject to a separate approval. This is Milton Drive, just at the end of the site. So as I say, the original intention was that 40 of the new dwellings would be served off this. The one on the right is obviously taken in, so that's the end property away from the site. There will be an emergency access that will be constructed from this location on the site, but obviously that will only be available for that purpose, although obviously pedestrian cycle access routes will be available at all times. These are not a bit small scale, but we're trying to give a relationship to the existing properties, many of which are bungalows. So obviously you can see that the application site itself set slightly lower, and separation distances, certainly in terms of relationships where there are going to be overlooking windows, they've all been taken into consideration as part of the application. These are just some additional street scenes and some house types that just give members an impression of the general makeup of these particular properties and the mix within that. Again, these are just a quick run through of some of those buildings on the site. So essentially, as I say, this application, the principle of a residential development on the site has already been established on there. Has that disappeared from you, by the way? I have to keep asking this. Okay. So that principle's been established. The applicant has submitted an application as a full detailed application, but there were some legal requirements associated with the outline approval. So these were things that were triggered as part of the main scheme. And you'll see in the resolution that there is, for instance, quite a substantial contribution towards education provision that will need to come forward as part of this particular scheme. In terms of the public open space, again, there is an application in for the details of the linear park, and that again needs to come forward in connection with this particular application. That will provide for the public open space within the site itself. So there's no provision apart from the bottom end. There's a small area there that's kept open where some of the drainage elements are in sight for that purpose. In terms of affordable housing, this scheme has 51 dwellings which will go to a registered social housing provider. So that's 32% of the total housing capacity on the site, and that's well above the standard that we would normally require for a development of this type. Conditions obviously are being posed for further details to come forward. So for instance, we mentioned earlier about protected species. There are existing buildings on the site, and before they are removed, additional bat surveys will be required, and other surveys in connection with our little black and white friends as well, for making sure that there is no harm to those species on the site as well. No objections from statutory undertakers to the development. So in terms of the drainage scheme, and again, full details will be required. Replacement planting will be accommodated on the site as well. No objections from the highway officer to those scheme. So it's recommended, I say there's quite a few conditions, a lot of additional information required, recommended for approval subject to those conditions and to the completion of the Section 106 agreement for the education and for the ensuring the provision of the linear park. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We've got questions of the report, and we've got Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a few questions. I think I've got three here for Graham. Graham, what arrangements have been put in place to update the college and the local residents about the progress of this development?
Do me one by one. Yeah, I think you recognise from past experience my memory is not very good, so if you give me three questions all at once, I tend to forget them. The college obviously have been consulted on the application themselves and have been involved in the final decisions that have been put forward. Clearly those are separate negotiations to the planning process itself. So what we're looking at is clearly an overall development that ultimately will be served from an access which is currently in the ownership of the school, and there have been negotiations taking place between the council and the school and obviously the applicant to try to come to a solution for that. If that wasn't possible ultimately, clearly they won't be able to implement the development, because I think if there is a condition that will say no houses shall be occupied until the parking and the access to that have been adequately provided. So we've not been directly involved in that, because obviously the planning process has to be kept on one side of negotiations about land ownership and so forth.
Okay, all right, thanks. And what steps are being taken to reduce the dirt from the site spreading on Foxdenton Lane and Broadway?
Okay, I don't know if I myself or Wendy would come in on this. As I say, there's a construction management plan, and obviously one of the elements of that will be that the appropriate wheel wash facilities put in place. So the track for the temporary access, it is already a metalled track in itself. So, but obviously the vehicles will be coming off greenfield areas and do it. So there will be measures put in place as part of that to ensure that obviously material doesn't get taken onto the highway.
Okay, thanks. And the other thing is, you mentioned the linear part there. Have we got any time when that's going to be brought to the planning committee?
I would expect it to be when obviously we don't know the dates of the next meetings with obviously the elections coming up, either late May or early June, whenever the next application, I would expect that application to come before members.
Right, okay, all right, thank you.
Councillor Gary?
Yeah, can I just ask how long it's going to take to get these houses built? I'm just conscious of the noise and the pollution disruption for the children.
It's again a bit like the previous scheme. It's 160 houses. It is quite a large development to come forward. I couldn't really say. I mean, this is obviously what the applicant would have to deal with. But clearly, it's going to take some consideration. It's not going to be done in a few months, obviously. So that really is all I can say, because we're not obviously involved in what was subsequently come forward in terms of the phasing and so forth for the development.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Jakes?
Thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I used to work at Newman, and in the morning when staff were coming in, when parents were dropping the kids off, it was always quite manic, to be honest. Are there any concerns that the extra volume of traffic, one from the new housing estate, is going to be problematic? And would people dropping the kids off, as we know they probably will, use the new estate as a cut through, which will obviously inconvenience the people who live there?
Shall I answer that?
Yes, if our traffic officer Wendy Morehouse can answer that. Yeah.
So answering your second question first, there is a possibility that parents will use the new estate eventually as parking and pick-up area for their children. So then we would treat that as we do any other residential development in the borough. There's already permission granted for the access road or for the existing college access to be used as an access into the site. So this application is only really considering the suitability of that. So this application is really only considering the layout of the residential development. And then because we've had a construction management plan submitted as well, we've considered the use of Foxdenton Lane for construction traffic for a limited period of time as well. So the principle of the access road of the existing Newman College has already been established as a use for the residential development, and it hasn't been considered to be a problem. We have, when we considered that application, not this one, we made sure that any interaction between the two uses, so the uses for the residential development and then for the access into the school, were adapted slightly to make it safer for the interaction of the two types of traffic.
Okay, Councillor Pythian.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. During the development stage, piling can cause problems of noise and vibration. Given the close proximity of the site to the college and local residents, what, if anything, can we do about this?
Again, through your chair, again, the construction management plan specifically dealt with that, and our colleagues in environmental health have expressed some concerns about the types of pile driving that will go on site, and the applicant has agreed to amend that in order to ensure that the methodology is agreed in advance with them, because obviously they're aware of problems. And I think it may well have occurred on one of the earlier phases of this development site as well, where those methods were used. So we are aware of that. We will be looking at those details, and I think the construction management plan was amended on the wording to make sure that we agree those details, should it be necessary for them to have to implement those. And similarly, the hours of any piling taking place, I think they wanted Saturdays for that, and we had that taken out of the site as well. So it's all got to be working day times on that. But again, those details will be assessed, and obviously environmental health will play a big part in determining whether that's going to be an acceptable methodology or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Since the height of the playing field has been raised, I'm led to understand this has caused some flooding issues in some of the back gardens on Foxdenton Lane. As the access road is to the rear of these properties, are we sure that these problems won't be exacerbated in any way?
Again, the consultation responses we've had back don't raise any objections in principle. The final drainage scheme is yet to be approved, and there is provision for sustainable drainage provision on the site as well. So, they're looking carefully at the implications, because clearly you're putting a lot more hard surface down if you put a residential development onto that site. But that will take into account any existing problems on there. That's a condition, and the full details of that obviously will have to come for subsequent agreement, and we will consult obviously with our own drainage engineers and of course with United Utilities. And also in terms of that, we're looking, there's obviously the human side, there's the ecological side of this as well, because you have a brook that runs through the site. We've got to make sure that a drainage scheme is satisfactory, that it doesn't cause any harm to that. So it's great having a linear park with all these ecological features in, but we've got to make sure that the two things can interact together. Subject to that, again, we're quite satisfied the conditions will ensure that can be those adequate schemes can be put in place. Thank you.
Okay. I've just got one more question.
Oh, sorry.
What is the current position regarding access arrangements to the site from Foxdenton Lane, and when is work expected to start on upgrading the track to accommodate larger vehicles?
Unfortunately, the applicant isn't here to answer that, because there would be a more reason. Clearly, they've got to do the necessary upgrading. So at the moment, for instance, the track will go all the way from round the back of the school to Foxdenton Lane is single width. So clearly that's a lot. That's not practical to do that. So there's a widening that's going to be required of that track. And as I said earlier on, even with that, you've got to ensure that there is adequate control of that. So they need to have banksmen always available on there, making sure we don't get a situation where there's some congestion onto Foxdenton Lane. But again, obviously, the applicant clearly wants to get on with the development as soon as possible, but they've still got to put these improvements, if you like, in place before they commence.
If I could bring in now Mr. Shuckman, who is Shuckley, who is the agent for the developer, and possibly he might be able to contribute to some of the answers that was requested.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, members. I think I'm registered to speak, but and I have got a speech to say, but I'm happy to take any questions now.
Well, if you wanted to make a contribution, you have 3 minutes, and you'll be told before the end of the 3 minutes when you're nearing the end, and then possibly take any questions after that.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. Good evening, members. I'm John Suckley, and I'm the planning agent. The site forms part of a very important strategic site for Oldham and is promoted by FO Developments, a public-private partnership between Oldham Council, Seddon and Grasscroft. The site has a mixed-use hybrid permission, and the proposed 160 houses will positively contribute towards Oldham's regeneration aspirations for the area. The application is acceptable because, 1, Whilst this is a full application, the principle of housing in this part of the strategic site has been established by the 2014 hybrid permission and its approved parameters. 2. The site will provide aspirational new family housing and all of the house types are compliant with national space standards. 3. The development will deliver affordable housing which substantially exceeds that required by the hybrid permission and the council's policy. The hybrid permission secured a financial contribution of circa 400,000 towards affordable housing, which would amount to 4 number affordable homes. However, the development will deliver 51 affordable dwellings by Great Places, which represents a 32% provision and a £9 million investment by the registered provider. 4. The site will secure significant benefits, including education contributions amounting to 540,000 and will fund phase 1 of the adjacent linear park. And 5. The proposals are technically robust and no objections are raised by any internal or external consultancy, including the local highways authority. The proposed access strategy is a substantial improvement when compared to the hybrid permission, which granted construction and permanent access via Voxdenton Lane for plots R4, R5 and R6, with the exception of 40 dwellings to be accessed via Milton Drive. In contrast, the proposed development will be accessed permanently from a new signal control junction from Newman College onto Broadway once constructed, and Milton Drive is now proposed to be used for pedestrian and emergency access only. Due to ground levels, it is not possible to construct the link to the Newman College access from the college side, and temporary construction access from Foxdenton Lane is required. A construction environmental management plan has been agreed and part widening of the construction access is proposed. It will not be possible for HGVs restricted to 8-wheel based lorries to turn right out of the construction access, and there will be a banksman posted at the construction entrance to control the flow of HGVs, which will be given a time slot. Once the temporary construction access from Foxdenton Lane has ceased, the track will stop being used for heavy construction traffic and will be used for light vehicles only. Once the scheme is completed, the land will be gifted to residents, providing them with an opportunity to extend their gardens. In summary, the development will be high quality and will secure substantial benefits for the council and the local community over and above the hybrid permission. Therefore, I respectfully request that you resolve to grant full plan permission in line with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Shuckley. Have we got any questions? Councillor Gloucester, did you have a question?
I did, yeah. It was actually before the developer arrived that I wanted to ask a question, so it's not really aimed at him, but it is about the access. Obviously, 160 properties is going to, on average, look at 320 vehicle movements. And if we're using the Foxdenton access for construction traffic, is that then going to become sort of another way in and out for residents? Because it just seems a massive stress to put on that one junction. You know, if the lights fail on that junction at some point, I can just see carnage happening, and you know, it's a large development to only have one access, I feel. Thank you.
Possibly we ask Wendy Morehouse to address that.
Can you just clarify part of your question again, Councillor Gloucester? Are you saying, are the residents going to use Foxdenton Lane?
Yeah, if that temporary construction access, you know, and I think the developer sort of related to that in his, but I didn't quite understand when he said, you know, is that going to be left as another option for residents to use, or is it all just going to be a single access point for the whole development?
So the access now, so I think what John was trying to explain was, with the original application in 2014, this parcel of land would have been accessed from Foxdenton Lane, so there would have been additional traffic along Foxdenton Lane. Now it's going to be accessed via the Newman College entrance. The Foxdenton Lane part now, the access from Foxdenton Lane will only be used for a short as possible period of time for construction traffic and construction worker traffic until the construction traffic can use the Newman College entrance, which is signal controlled. So it's in highway safety terms, it was safer for the college entrance to be used for the construction vehicles as soon as they could be as soon as it could be used.
So then that Fox Denton Lane access, did I hear correctly that will then become an emergency access to the development? No, I've got that wrong.
The emergency access for the development, which is, it's not, people sometimes think it's just for emergency vehicles. That isn't what an emergency access is. It's if the primary access to the development is ever severed for any reason temporarily, they can use the emergency access. In this case, it will be Milton Drive.
Okay.
So that will be very temporary for short periods of time if there's an emergency.
Right, thank you.
Has any members got any more questions of Mr. Shuckley? Councillor Taylor was down to speak, but I don't think she can make it. So if we just carry on and consider the where the committee wants to go with this, I would propose we accept the officer's recommendation, including conditions. So,
Councillor Dean.
Sorry.
Could I just suggest an extra condition? We have discussed it, but for some reason it doesn't appear to be on the conditions, but I think it's quite critical.
Right.
The use of Fox Denton Lane by construction vehicles should only be so they can turn right into the site and left out. I want to try and restrict a right turn out of the track onto Fox Denton Lane. We need them to turn left so that the access along Fox Denton's restricted to quite a short length. The condition relating to the construction management plan says in accordance with the construction management plan, but that part of the strategy isn't included in it. So I just need an extra either part of that condition or a new condition saying that they can only turn left. It will just be some temporary physical barrier to stop them turning right.
Okay, so back to square one. I will move approval subject to the conditions as laid down and the extra one outlined by our traffic officer, Wendy Morehouse. Thank you. Is that seconded, Sal?
I'll second that, Chair. Councillor Jakes.
Has anybody got any comments or observations? No. If we then could move to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Akhtar?
For.
Councillor Davis?
For.
Councillor Gary?
For.
Councillor Gloucester?
For.
Councillor Hartness?
For.
Councillor Hewitt?
For.
Councillor Ibrahim is no longer with us. Councillor Iqbal?
For.
Councillor Jakes?
For.
Councillor Malik? Sorry, Councillor Malik has sent his apologies. Let me delete him. Councillor Vivian?
For.
Councillor Sheldon?
For.
Councillor Serjeant?
For.
And Councillor Dean?
For.
That's unanimous, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed. If we can move on to item 8, which is the former Weaver's answer, and this is a conversion into household multi-occupation, and ask, is it Mr. Dickman again to outline the application?
It is indeed. No supporting cast this evening, I'm afraid. So this application relates to the former Weaver's Arms public house, and it's a proposal to reuse the building for supported accommodation for presently homeless people. So obviously there will be 9 bedrooms provided within the accommodation, and obviously support facilities as well, to ensure that appropriate organisation within that building is undertaken. So this is a premises. See, all the signage, the pub signage has been removed. It extends from the corner, as you see in the top image, down to where the you see that the boarding behind the bus stop on there, and then at the bottom goes down the side.
Presentation up,
Oh,
Mr.
Sorry, we can't
do you not see it?
No.
Oh. I forgot to ask this time whether you could see it or not. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, so as I say, change of use, Bond Public House to supported accommodation. These are the photographs. So the top image is the view from Milnrow Road. As you see, it's a corner plot. The original pub signage all been removed. It extends from this corner down to where you can just see at the right-hand corner of the picture where it adjoins another terraced, linked terraced house. And you see there's a bus shelter there. The access to the building will be behind, so you can see there that area of the site that will be altered to provide the main access into the facility, and then you can see obviously down the side street of the building. There was a previous application for the same use but with extension to the building, and that involved the additions to the roof. So there were full-length dormers added to the front and rear elevations, and for this hipped gable on the left-hand side to be taken up to a ridge height. That was refused on design grounds, because you see it's fairly traditional property, fits in with the characters of some of the housing adjacent to it. The use, however, wasn't deemed to be problematic. So here's the building. You can see it's there on the site. Terraced housing down the side streets, the back of the site as well. Milnrow Road, obviously, and some more commercial properties just off the picture there to the kind of top left-hand corner of the site. So it's a mixed area along the main frontage, but with residential areas to the back. This is giving an indication of the back of the building. So again, as you can see there, these elements of it, and where the new window openings would need to go within the building itself. So these are the accommodation that's going to be provided. So there'll be 9 bedrooms, and say office areas, supporting areas within the site. A couple of things that we just picked up on really in terms of the internal layout. There are standards for the size of rooms, so we're looking at this as if it was a house in multiple occupation, and obviously we've consulted with environmental health on the sizes of rooms that were necessary. Overall, they do meet or if not exceed those particular standards. One issue that had been raised was the access to the site and its position in relation to the bus stop at the front of the site, and the fact that obviously you have people waiting at there, and that being a main entrance to the facility. The other issue that we'd raised, although the premises and the internal facilities do tend to meet the standards, you'll note bedroom 7, which is on the left-hand side of the accommodation. It has light to it, it gets that accommodation, and obviously it's it's accepted that this is effectively intended as temporary accommodation. We have raised the issue of that and whether that could be approved with the applicant, and that's it's been submitted for approval on this basis, taking into account really the overall facility. So in terms of impact of the development, the representations have obviously raised a number of issues, and one of those is to deal with fears of crime, antisocial behaviour associated with this particular facility. Those criteria are material planning considerations that can be taken into account. However, you have to have some evidence that this particular use would be responsible for that activity. So fears are relevant, but they can't be in general terms. If they're in general terms, you would never allow a facility like this in any location at all. Has the presentation gone now, by the way, before I carry on? Thank you. So that's an important issue for members to consider. There have been instances of antisocial behaviour in the local area, and we've looked at those instances, but none of them are, if you like, comparable. So they're not ones which are the result of a facility of this particular type. And remember, this is accommodation which will be managed. So this is not just a general multiple occupation house. This is for management of those facilities to get people off the street and give them the support that they need in this particular site. The area itself, as I say, there's residential at the rear of the site, but it is a mixed use site. And you also need to be aware, obviously, it used to be a public house. So at its prime, would have been busy, particularly in the in late evening periods. So there is an element of activity in there. In terms of traffic generation, clearly there will be some staff to the accommodation, but again, as a commercial premise, there will always be some traffic generation. If it was used as an office, it would be generating traffic. If it was used as a shop, it would. Clearly, the residents would not be expected. The temporary residents would not be expected to have vehicles. So again, it's not considered that in that location there would be a justification for refusal on that particular ground. So we've recommended approval. It's intended to provide a much needed facility in the area. We don't consider that although there are elements of it which perhaps could be improved, that's not a reason to refuse an application. It's when you look at the thing in the whole, is it an appropriate use for the building? And it is considered that that is the case, that there's no strong reasons to refuse the application. So subject to the recommendation and for some crime prevention measures which have been recommended by Greater Manchester Police, who again have not objected in principle, subject to those measures being put in place, the application should be approved. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Has anybody got any questions of the officer, Councillor Harkness?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about the antisocial behaviour, and I suppose, like I said, you said the Greater Manchester Police have been contacted and some measures have been suggested. I wonder whether that, that sort of consultation, whether that involved the local bobbies, the neighbourhood officers who know the area quite well and know in quite detail some of the issues possibly. But you also mentioned some concerns were raised over the access, and I think did I recall that the access had been moved? But if you could perhaps elaborate on that a little bit, because I suppose if they've moved it somewhere else, that could actually exacerbate the antisocial behaviour, couldn't it?
Yeah, no, it is an existing access, but there are a number of access. Traditionally, it would have been separate accesses to the public house itself. The main access for this facility, though, will be directly behind the bus shelter. So obviously the presence of the bus shelter itself narrows the footway at that particular point. And obviously you then get potential people are coming in and out of the facility and so on. You could get some problems with that. But that's an issue, but it's not deemed to be a significant issue in the overall, because again, no matter if the pub was reopened as a pub, that could be reopened as an access as well. You would have exactly the same problem. It's just an issue to just be aware of, really, in terms of the application and how the internal configuration to it and the main entranceway has been dealt with. Thank you.
Councillor Surgeon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Graham, for the presentation. I think you touched upon it a bit earlier about the potential ventilation and the light issue. And as long as that is taken into consideration, I'm happy to approve the application.
Well, we'll wait for that to come, the April. Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. You mentioned, Graham, about the access in and out of the building behind the bus stop. There may be certain concerns about that, which you did highlight. I mean, one of them is that if people are out there having a cigarette and there's people on the bus stop and things like that, it might be a little bit intimidating. That's just one reason. But has the developer been have they spoken to the developer to see whether there's another entrance that they could use to get in and out of the building?
Yeah, the case officer has looked into the internal layout issues, and over the time we've had some amendments to that particular scheme. I'm not sure that particular issue though has been raised. The one thing I would say is obviously there used to be another entrance, main entrance to the pub further along the street as well. So there is an option, but obviously what members have got to consider is whether the scheme as submitted is in itself unacceptable, not necessarily whether there's a more acceptable alternative solution.
But sorry, if I can come back then. So it is possible then that there may be another alternative then?
The building used to have another entrance on the frontage, on the Milnrow Road frontage, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sheldon.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Hartness and Davis have said there, that I worry that people might go outside for a cigarette and a lone woman stood in the bus stop will feel very vulnerable. I'm just wondering, is there a room round the back? We saw a red building attached to the old stone building. Is the sort of room at the back which could be created into a communal space that smoking is allowed? Because I presume smoking would not be allowed in the rooms, but I don't know that. If you could clarify that, it is just a worry that. Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yeah, it is quite tight around the back of the building, so it would be difficult for a particular area to be placed around there. It's not a public house I regularly go in, so I don't know where people used to smoke when it was in operation as a pub, and it may well be that people used to go around the back. But again, it's the leading a horse to water issue, that you can provide an area at the back of the pub for people to smoke, but you can't actually force them to use that particular area.
Just let me come back, because we must, it's going to be managed, so there's somebody on site, I presume, all the time to say, hang on a minute, you don't smoke here, you smoke round the back. We've got to prevent any problems before they start. I understand it was a pub and all that, but let's make people safe while we're doing.
Councillor Wright-Tan.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to speak on this issue, but I've just got an observation. With due respect to my colleagues, but I think some of the comments that are being made today are a bit unfair on young people, to be honest with you. This will be obviously a scheme for young people to be rehoused into, and it'll be managed. And what would you rather have, somebody who's drunk at the front door up there and smoking, or a sober young person? I'll always prefer a sober young person, to be honest with you. And I think we need to take that into account. We shouldn't be tarnishing young people the way that some of the comments have been made today, and the way that some of the residents have made some comments in the report as well. Yet, duly, yes, we do have some concerns in terms of how some of these schemes do get managed. But I've got a couple of similar schemes on the street that I live, and they're pretty well managed. And a lot of times they are, and it all depends on the provider. And if we do work with them, they do provide an essential service within our communities that's really required.
Thank you. Councillor Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. I just find it really unusual on this application that there's no plan for the external provision. So I can't see anything on my documents. So I might have something missing for the parking, any sort of bin storage or any communal areas. And normally in an application like that, we do receive that. So I just wondered where that's gone, or has it just not been submitted or considered? Because I do have concerns about the external use of the premises.
Do you want me to come in on that?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't any car parking associated with it, as there wasn't any car parking associated with the pub. Similarly, the pub, of course, itself would have generated waste probably far more waste in terms of what would be required than this particular facility. There is space available at the back of the site, and of course, if members wanted to have a little bit more say in how that is provided on there, there is no reason why a condition couldn't be added to any recommendation for approval to deal with that particular issue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. At this stage, we do have somebody speaking against this, and if we can give them an opportunity, and that's Susanna Booth. If you'd like to speak for up to 3 minutes, and before your time is due up, somebody will give you a notification. If you could just start in your own time.
Thank you. So I'm speaking on behalf of a group of local residents. There's over 100 of us, and we do have objections to these plans. There's been quite a bit of discussion about the previous use as a pub. Now, the pub was always a big part of the local community, whereas we don't feel that this company that proposed the development, CarePoint, have engaged with the local community. We feel like they've expressed a lack of care for the residents around. They've fly tipped building debris, which was there for a number of weeks until they were forced to remove it. And ultimately, we feel that this lack of care is displayed in the plans. The front door and main access point has been mentioned. That leaves a very narrow walkway in front of the bus stop. Now, if you're a mum with a pram or an older person with a Zimmer frame or a wheelchair user, there's a very narrow walkway. And if people are kind of coming in and out of the property, or if they're having a cigarette or just socialising at the front door, this can be very intimidating. The plans themselves, they don't seem to include any disabled facilities or disabled access to the property. They don't seem to take account of, I'm not an expert on plans, but they don't seem to take account of kind of fire evacuation procedures. It seems to me that there's no escape routes from the second floor. The adjoining properties are concerned about the increased fire risk due to it being a multi-occupancy building. What measures will be in place to control fires? It's been mentioned about kind of waste concerns. Will the bins be emptied by weekly contractors, and how will this affect local traffic and the residents? Because car parking, now that is already an issue in this area, and that will obviously be made worse from staff at the premises and visitors. And we are quite worried. Now, we've looked at CarePoint for reassurance, and we thought, well, let's investigate this company. Their website, it seems all about surface. We would love to know that there's going to be a facility that's going to be well managed and that will help people. That is the ideal. But the website of CarePoint, they don't seem to be CQC, that's Care Quality Commission, registered. So we're worried about an unregulated company that's maybe just in this for the profit and that won't care for people that come in, vulnerable people that may have substance abuse problems. Where the CarePoint's website has social media buttons that doesn't work. We can't find any evidence of similar properties, success stories, testimonials from people they've helped. It's very vague. Now, the local community has suffered from an increase in crime and antisocial behaviour. We seem to have all of a sudden had... Okay, I'll wind this up, yeah. I'll just say we do seem to have an increase of antisocial behaviour. It's not always reported. Antisocial behaviour can be a group making you feel uncomfortable, loitering outside when you're trying to get past with your young child or your pram. And I'll finish now. Thank you very much.
Has anybody got any questions of Ms. Booth? No? Okay, thank you. We've also had a request from Councillor Chris Gloucester to speak on the issue.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've raised this committee because of the fears of residents and elected members in relation to this proposed development. It first came to my attention because the premises around August last year were being subject to repeated complaints to me and other colleagues in relation to waste and debris and all sorts of goings on at this public house, both internally and externally, to such an extent that I had to involve the council's enforcement officers twice. All this was before there was any form of application for any form of works or building regulations taking place. I'll deal with each area that I've raised with the planning office in turn. Suzanne Booth has touched upon them. Firstly, let's make no mistake. I understand what Councillor Akhtar said, but this is a halfway house which the applicants wish to place in the middle of a dense residential area. These premises are fronted by tourist residences. They've got tourist residents to the right hand side, they've got tourist residents to the left hand side, and they've also got a lot of terraced residences to the rear of it. Now, the residents have a right to a private and family life along with peaceful enjoyment of the possessions, and if you actually read the opening gambit of the agenda, it's quite clearly explained that residents are entitled to that. Residents and ward councillors have a clear fear, and I can't emphasise enough the fear that residents have should this development be permitted, because they fear that there's going to be an increase in crime and disorder and antisocial behaviour. We've currently got two other HMOs on the street, which have attracted a little bit of antisocial behaviour. Now, further down the street, and I think Mr Dickman will be able to confirm this, the about 300 yards further down the road, that's not surrounded by residences, is the Bengal Brasserie. That similarly has an application in for conversion to something like a 9-bedroom HMO. The residents have not complained about that because that is in a far better location to be an HMO than this premises that is bang in the middle of a very densely populated tourist area. There's 2 points I'd make in relation to the crime and disorder and the antisocial behaviour. Firstly, in the report, there's no mention that these premises have had all the windows put through, and that was done prior to this report. So where the stats have come from, I've absolutely no idea. And secondly, the suggestion that the local policing team have no concerns is simply unbelievable. I question whether the actual local policing team, that's the officers with the feet on the ground in the area, have been consulted, because I'm absolutely certain that they haven't. There's questions raised in relation to the internal arrangements. Simply, there's no recreational area provided for the occupants in these premises. There's no lounge or anything like that. These are supported people apparently that have nowhere to go other than a small single bedroom that we've heard from Mr Dickman, one of which at least. So if you're unlucky to get bedroom number 7, you're going to have very little light in it either. How will the makeup of these premises help vulnerable people that are going to be confined 24/7 to this small room? Or are they going to go out into the local area, and are there going to be issues with the local residents? If you want a barometer for the problems that a premises of this type will bring to a community, you need look no further than Spring Street at Grenicas. I can tell you that the issues for residents in relation to that establishment, which is not dissimilar to this proposal, is horrendous. As I've said, the area is heavily residential with terraced houses prevalent on all 4 sides. Parking is currently oversubscribed. Additional vehicles for staff will cause difficulty for existing residents, and similarly for the businesses Mr Dickman's mentioned further down the street. I'll also mention visual amenity. I understand the applicants intend to render the whole premises, or more certainly than they did in the last application, although I can't find in this application any suggestion that they were actually going to do that. However, if you know the area, you'll know that it's all stone terraced houses that are made of pitch face sandstone. So if these premises were to be rendered, then it'd just be an absolute blot on the landscape. And a further issue I'll raise concerns the area of frontage. Now, Mr. Dick, in actual fact, Graham, can you just put the pictures up, please, of showing the frontage, because it's something that I really need to explain to the committee. And it concerns, number one, the bus shelter, and number two, the main entrance.
We going through a difficult as a humanitarian bit of photo shoot going on.
Is it up?
Itself as well. Dr. Kershaw's actually provides end of life support to individuals who've obviously lived in Oldham, cared about Oldham, worked in Oldham.
I think we've got somebody on the line.
No, it's definitely not coming from me, Graham.
Have you got the image?
No.
No.
Oh,
right, it's gone now.
Hang on.
You've just got your DMS up, your screen up, Graham.
Right, well,
hang on, we're getting there.
He's finding the pictures, but as we said previously, this is a public house.
Is it there now?
Yes, it's there, Graham. Just leave it at that, please. Yeah, it is a public house. I know it's a public house because, in fairness, I used to go in it. Not a lot, but I did. What's happened is that, as I was saying before, that work's been done to the premises. Well, in actual fact, what's happened is the whole of the premises have been gutted. And if you look to the top picture and then look to the right, you can see something that looks like, well, it looks like weatherboard to me. Whether it is or not, I've absolutely no idea. But that is the doorway that is behind the bus shelter that they're currently proposing to use. Now, what you possibly can't see is also for the house next door a garden wall, so it makes it just really difficult for anybody travelling along that road. But if you look where the lamppost is and look immediately to the left of the lamppost, you can see a window, but that window actually was the main entrance to the premises, which is, and I've been and measured it, it's a 900mm entrance that without consent they've boarded up. Well, they've stoned it up and blocked it off and made it into a window. So there's an absolute issue in relation to that current entrance that they're proposing to have as an entrance, because there's a very small gap behind the bus shelter. It's really restricted, and anybody that's using that footway will come into difficulties is if, as we've said, people are stood in the doorway. So for me to summarise, as members of the committee, we've got a duty to consider residents, and the residents quite rightly have a fear of crime and disorder. Now, it's fine saying that there is limited crime and disorder in the area, but the premises haven't been occupied yet, so you can't gauge what crime and disorder is likely to occur. But what you can do is look at other similar premises, as I've stated, and then make a judgment from that. And the residents who have this fear of crime and disorder are frightened, and they've told me that they're frightened, and I agree with them. Mr. Dickman made a point that you as members need to look at this and consider it in its current format. Well, my suggestion to you is that in its current format, the issues that relate to it are substantial enough for you to be able to refuse it, and then, if necessary, the applicants will have to go away and come back and submit a better design that's more suitable for the area and probably a better use. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Has anybody got any comments or questions in regard to what Councillor Gloucester has said?
Chair, I've got my hand up.
Yes, it's just that Graham's still got his screen up. I can't.
Oh, sorry. Technology.
Councillor Jeggs.
Thank you. Councillor Gloucester, I am a little concerned that the reason that you want us to refuse this is based on quite a lot of assumptions that the people who will be using this would, first of all, be committing crime, and secondly, that there isn't, that they're not there for the purpose for which I presume it's going to be built, which is to get people actually on the housing ladder. And looking at the design of it, each of the bedrooms has a toilet and a shower, which I know somebody who lives in a similar place where they have to share toilets and showers. This one appears to be far more superior to that. There is also a study room where people can access computers, where presumably they can apply for jobs. So I just find that the fact that you assume that the people who would live here would go out and commit crime just seems to be a big assumption. And I think, given the fact that we have a larger number of homeless people on the streets and we need places for them to stay, why wouldn't well-managed accommodation be a far better option?
Well, I think.
Could I say?
Hang on. I was asked the question.
Yes. Well, I'm going to add to it. You see, because sometimes I don't get annoyed very regularly, but sometimes when you refer to, which you have done, Spring Street, which is in my ward, which I actually visit quite regularly, which I've represented that area and that particular premise now for over 10 years. And I think that in all that time, I think there's been one issue that has come to my notice from local residents. And those local residents I meet on a very regular basis because they have a community group and community organisation. And you denigrated them and denigrated the premises, without, and I would like possibly to provide me all this evidence of this antisocial behaviour of homeless people that have resided there now quite happily and provided a good facility with a very good organisation now for over 40 years.
Right. Well, just to answer your question, Councillor Dean, I was in Oldham Police for 40 years, wasn't I? I know all about Spring Street, so I appreciate what you're saying, and hopefully, the place has improved, but Spring Street had a very bad reputation during my service at Oldham, and I spent, quite a considerable time at Spring Street and in the surrounding areas dealing with the issues. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm not denigrating anybody. I'm just telling you what my experience is.
I'm sorry, Chris, you did do. You really.
No, what I told you was to use Spring Street as a barometer, and I've been there and I know what has happened in relation to Spring Street got a bad name. Spring Street got a bad name 30 years ago because it was an unregulated DOS house, and a group of people, including myself, then formed Oldham Single Homeless Project, which became Threshold, and it's been well managed now for over 30 years without hardly any problems, providing accommodation for 18 homeless people continually and rehousing them. So I think that when we start, if you want these people rather be on the street and rather be in very poor accommodation, fine. But a lot of us possibly won't want that. Councillor Harkness. No, hang on. You don't want me to answer Councillor Jakes' question first?
Well then, yeah.
Can you just give me a refresher as to what you actually asked, please, Elaine?
Well, you talked about basically it was the assumption that there would be crime, but also looking at this development where each of the rooms has a shower, it has a toilet. It's a far these are far superior rooms than somebody I know who lives in one who has to share a shower block and toilets. And as long providing that it is well managed, which obviously isn't a planning decision, I can't see any reason to refuse this.
Right. Well, we'll go back to what Suzanne Booth was saying. There is no recreational facility whatsoever within those premises. No recreational facility whatsoever in those premises. So there will be people going into those premises that are basically, unless they go out into the neighbourhood, they'll be there 24/7, which is the point that I've raised. At no time have I ever said, nor did I raise it when I put my comments to the planning committee, anything about the type of occupants that were going into those premises, because CarePoint have not explained to the ward councillors, to the planning department, or to the residents who or what type of resident is likely to live there. That is why the residents have a fear of crime. And that is the point that both myself and the residents want to make. It's people who are making assumptions in relation to what myself and the residents have said, not us. If it was a properly managed location, then in fairness, we wouldn't have any objection to it. But CarePoint have not communicated to anybody what sort of facility, what sort of resident, what sort of plans they have to basically ensure the safety and well-being of their residents and the safety and well-being of the local community who are in fear and who I speak on behalf of.
Councillor Hartness.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. So, I mean, looking at this, there seems to be some key concerns I've got is around that access, which we've mentioned before, and around the bus shelter. If there isn't any sort of recreational facilities inside, that's also a concern as well. But in terms of the impact on residents as well, but the lack of detail around the external sort of the bins and all that sort of stuff and what's happening outside is again a bit of a concern. So there could be grounds there to say, well, actually, let's refuse it on that, or even maybe defer to get further information and details around that, which might try and alleviate some of the concerns which have been raised tonight. And possibly one of the other options we could consider maybe is a temporary order, whether a lot of these concerns and things could be monitored and see what impact they have and whether we need to then address them in maybe 12 months' time.
Councillor Gloucester. Hazel Gloucester.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as I've said previously, my concerns about the external lack of detail. I get there. Normally in the HMO there is a lounge of some description, and normally a HMO has less rooms than this. So I'm going to propose that we defer this and ask that the plan, particularly for that ground floor area, is looked at again, and possibly that we'll look at 8 bedrooms rather than 9 and try and give, because that bedroom 7, I'm sorry, I can't see where the light in that bedroom will come from, apart from that small window in the corner, which, you're not going to get any light into that room from that. So I just think they need to reduce it by at least 1 room and look at the basement area. That's my proposal, that there is a deferral.
Okay. Well, I would second the deferral, and I would go back to the developers and with the suggestions that you've made, also on the internal layout, on the conflict of access, and also on the proper definition of proper bin and refuge areas as well. And I think that we might get a better development back from that. Councillor Davis, did you want to comment on that? You're on mute, Councillor Davis.
Sorry, I just wanted to emphasise, about the agreeing with you both about deferment. It's probably a good thing to do, and see if the developer could look at the access in and out of the building. It's nothing against, I don't know, they may be rough sleepers or whatever. I mean, people who know me know that I work with a rough sleeping community. In fact, if I probably know most of them who possibly were residents in there, but that's not the point. The point is, it's now to do with the fact that they're rough sleepers. It's the fact that anybody who's going out and standing around people who are at the bus stop, that could be a concern. Now, if it could be moved up further up, then that won't be a concern. It's just to make it more viable. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Dickman, did you want to make any comments before we go to the vote?
Yeah, I think obviously I've listened carefully to all the comments that have been made, and you know, we've said about antisocial behaviour and crime and how you can't generalise about these things, but there've been a number of comments that have been made about this particular facility and you know what's within that, how it's organised, the arrangements and so on. And in terms of the suggestions being put forward for the deferral, I would perhaps suggest that takes the form of looking at the management plan of how this works. So you've got this element of, you know, who's going to be in there, how they're going to be managed, 24 hours a day, how does that work? What aspects would be put in place to stop people standing outside that front door smoking and so forth? And that could also tie in with the facilities that are inside there, the quality of that. So it's saying there's not a per se objection to the use, so long as, and I think Ms. Booth made the point right at the beginning of this, that it's about the lack of understanding of how this would work, and that's what's causing concerns amongst some of the residents in the area. So I would just wanted to make that point that if you're going to defer, you might want to look at it in that kind of more rounded way, rather than just say that room's not quite as big than it should be. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think we fully accept that, and I'm sure Councillor Gloucester would as well.
Can I ask a question of Mr. Dickman, please, Chair? Yeah. Is it possible for us to work with you, Graham, as ward councillors, to ask those questions and get a list of information together that we'd like to see back from the developer? Is that possible?
Yeah, if obviously you've not made a decision on to do that just yet, but if that is the decision that's made, yes. If you want to send me a list of issues that you would like them to clarify, then clearly we can pass that on to them and see what they can come forward with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could we move to the vote, please?
I proposed a deferral. And somebody did actually second. It was you, Chair, wasn't it? Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So you're voting on deferring this matter. Councillor Akhtar?
Against.
Councillor Davis?
For.
Councillor Gary?
For.
Councillor Gloucester?
For.
Councillor Hartness?
For.
Councillor Iqbal?
Against.
Councillor Jakes?
For.
Councillor Fithian?
For.
Councillor Sheldon?
For.
Councillor Serjean?
Against.
And Councillor Dean?
For.
That was carried 8 votes to 3, Chair.
Thanks very much indeed. We move on to the item 9, which is 142 Middleton Road, Royton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'll just try and I'll run through this one very quickly, if I can get it up on the screen again. Have you got it? Opening page? Yeah, can you see the opening page?
Yes.
Yes. Anybody? Right, thank you. Yeah, this is one again. Members who would have been on committee at that time, probably all of you actually, will recall this is an application that came before committee. It was again former public house that received planning permission for conversion into apartments and for an extension to be built. Work had commenced on that, and issues about the viability of it came to the fore and the condition of the building. So this application came forward to demolish the public house and to put replacement building alongside the previously approved extension on the site. So this is the building, that's where the pub was. You can see the extension already built to the side of the pub. Again, around that side. Things have deteriorated since these pictures were originally taken. These are from the original presentation, were originally taken. So this is the premises. The sole issue that we have is that as a part of that approval, there was a requirement for a financial contribution towards off-site open space. Since then, the applicant submitted a viability appraisal, which actually indicates that if that requirement, which amounted to £37,000, was required, it would undermine the potential viability of the scheme coming forward. There is another issue that local members will possibly be aware of at the moment, is that the deterioration of the building is itself leading to some antisocial behaviour. I don't know if it's gone, but there was a burnt out caravan, for instance, next to the site for some considerable period of time. So it is important that we bring this forward. The applicant therefore is requesting that the planning permission stands, but that the requirement for the financial contribution is removed. And as I say, we've looked carefully into that viability issue, and our council's officers have accepted the information and recommend that committee agrees to remove that requirement. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Pythian.
Yeah, Mr. Dickman, could we make sure that what if we approve this tonight? Can we make sure that the developer finds out straight away so we can get a move on with it? Because we're getting the ward council is getting constantly complaints off residents saying that Royton's going downhill because there's burnt out caravan on the premises, and there's also antisocial behaviour. These kids pulling moonies at old ladies across the road and stuff like this, and it's not good at all, really. So if we do approve it, can we make sure that they know about all these issues?
We are, through you, Chair, we are dealing with this from an enforcement perspective. So yeah, yes, we can make sure that the requirements are adhered to on that they don't simply use this as an excuse to carry on. It is important, as I say, that we get that work recommenced and get the building one to remove that antisocial behaviour, and to get that residential accommodation brought into use. Thank you,
this development needs moving on straight away, really. Thanks.
We could do with serving a notice on the organisation to get rid of the burnt out caravan as well, which is a danger and a mess in the community. In that community. Is there any more observations or questions? Could I move approval? Sorry, Councillor Sheldon, did you want?
Yeah, quickly, Chair. It's just if you could clarify, if I could ask Mr. Dickman if he could clarify how they come to a financial decision. Do you actually work with our team in audit, or have you got a financial department in the planning department that would say, yes, it's viable, and no, it's not viable? And at the end of the day, if it takes 2 years to develop, would you then look at the cost of each apartment and say, oh, hang on a bit, you have made a profit at the end of this exercise, so we will hold some back for the council to use as 106 money?
Mr. Aubrey could answer this, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I have a background in viability as well as planning, so I tend to look at it at the moment on behalf of the council. And the problem with this site was effectively that it was developed in two halves. And that, I think, was the real, I can't remember the details of the viability assessment off the top of my head, I'm afraid, Councillor, but certainly I recall that one of the key issues was the fact that we weren't looking at the whole development, we were just looking at the element that's part of this this application. So therefore it's almost the more difficult part of the scheme to do, and it was certainly very marginal.
Thank you. Okay, if we've got no other contributions, I would move approval.
Can I second that, Chair?
Thank you. Could we move to the vote, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Akhtar?
For.
Councillor Davis?
For.
Councillor Gary?
For.
Councillor Gloucester?
For.
Councillor Hartness?
For.
Councillor Iqbal?
For.
Councillor Jakes?
For.
Councillor Fithian?
For.
Councillor Sheldon?
Abstain.
Councillor Serjean?
For.
And Councillor Dean?
For.
So that's 10 votes in favour, Chair.
Thank you. If we move on to item 10, which is Mayfield School. Mr. Dickman.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a reduction in a payment for a slightly different reason. This was an application approved for extensions to the school which have now taken place. As part of that scheme, a significant number of trees were to be removed. As the scheme's nearing completion now, the Council's Trees Officer was invited back to the site to assess the current situation, and it appears that he's satisfied that a number of those trees do not need to be removed, and also, of course, equally important that they haven't been damaged during the process. The council policy is we do a 3-for-1 replacement, so if you can't provide them on site, you would pay a contribution for them to be provided off site, and that was calculated based on the number of trees originally to be removed. As we're now satisfied that the same number don't need to be removed, the school has asked for part of that funding to be returned, effectively because they were desperate to get on with it. They paid up front so they could get a planning permission and get on with the scheme, but clearly the school would like to be able to spend that money on extras. They've done some replanting within the site as well to make up for the trees, so it's not simply an off-site contribution, and it's really because committee were involved in that original decision. We brought it back to members for them to for yourselves to well, it's recommended that you agree to that change. Thank you, Chair.
I think it's pretty straightforward. Has anybody got any questions at all? No. I would move approval.
Can I second that, Chair?
Thank you. If we go to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Akhtar?
For.
Councillor Davis?
For.
Councillor Gary?
For.
Councillor Gloucester?
For.
Councillor Hartness?
For.
Councillor Iqbal?
For.
Councillor Jakes?
For.
Councillor Fithian?
For.
Councillor Sheldon?
For.
Councillor Serjean?
For.
Councillor Dean?
For.
That was unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. And the last item on the agenda is item 11, appeals. They're there to note. I don't know whether anybody's got any comments at all. No? Okay, we note those. Thanks very much for your attendance and patience and contributions, and we'll see you after the municipal New Year starts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Chair.
everybody. Good night.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thanks.